Welcome to the deep dive. So if I say Tunisia, what comes to mind? For a lot of people, it's, Mediterranean beaches, maybe the ruins of Carthage, the markets in Tunis.
Right, the usual tourist spot.
Exactly. But what often gets missed, what lies just beneath that surface, is this incredibly deep, powerful history of Islamic mysticism, of Sufism.
And it's not just history, it's a living, breathing tradition today. For this deep dive, we've got a great set of sources, transcripts, historical analyses that let us get past the brochures.
So what's our mission here?
Our mission is to really reveal that vibrant spiritual landscape. We want to focus on the key figures who honestly shape Sufism globally and the places in and around Tunis that still anchor that path.
Okay, let's unpack this, because
Wow.
Tunisia isn't just a place with old buildings. It's been a cultural epicenter for millennia.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we all know the ancient history, Carthage, Rome, that whole saga. But in the Islamic period, Tunisia became this intellectual
A
incubator,
real center of gravity.
a huge one. You have Kairouan, which some scholars actually consider the fourth holiest city in Sunni Islam. And then you have Tunis itself, with the Zaytuna Mosque at its heart.
Which was founded way back around 731 CE.
Way back. And it quickly became the engine for scholarship for the entire region, for the whole Maghreb.
So Zaytuna wasn't just a mosque. It was, for centuries, maybe the most important university in the Western Islamic world.
Yeah.
You have giants like the historian Ibn Khaldun teaching there. It's that intellectual density that, I guess, must have attracted the mystics.
It's the perfect environment for it. And to really get a feel for the spiritual geography, we need a few key terms that our sources bring up again and again. The first one is wali. It
Well,
literally means friend of God. It's a title for someone who has reached a very high spiritual station. They're revered for their closeness to the divine.
and that closeness isn't just an idea, right? It's something tangible.
It is, and that's the second term, baraka. This is the spiritual grace or the blessings that a wali has. It's a real pervasive influence that people actively seek out.
How do they do that?
Well, that brings us to the third term, the Zawiya. In North Africa, a Zawiya is basically the home of a Sufi order. But, crucially, it's often built right around the tomb of a revered wali. It's part shrine, part school, part community center.
So the city itself becomes a kind of spiritual map.
It really does. You can see it immediately with the Zawiya of Sidi Mahrez, which is just a short walk from the Zaytuna Mosque.
Sidi Mahrez. He's the patron saint of Tunis, right?
He is. And what's so interesting is that he was a major scholar of Maliki law, which is, a very legalistic path. He wasn't really a Sufi himself.
But his spiritual authority, his baraka, was so powerful that later Sufis were just drawn to his memory.
Exactly. The sources describe his mausoleum as this incredibly ornate centerpiece. It shows you that the search for baraka wasn't some fringe activity. It was central to the identity of the city.
Okay, and this is where it gets really interesting, because as we move into the 12th and 13th centuries, things just explode. Tunis becomes this hub for some of the greatest mystics in history.
It really does. And we have to start with Ibn Arabi, the Sheikh al-Akbar, the greatest master. His influence is it's immense.
And our sources say his time in Tunis was absolutely critical for him. He visited twice, right?
Right.
Once in 1194 and then again in 1201.
And he wasn't just passing through, he was there for one reason. His main spiritual teacher, Abdulaziz al-Madawi, lived and taught right there.
So this relationship was the defining one for him.
It fundamentally shaped his entire worldview. It was with al-Madawi that Ibn Arabi had some of his most profound spiritual visions. He talks about entering a state he called God's vast earth, or the earth of reality.
Okay, that sounds pretty dense. What does that actually mean, to enter the earth of reality? Why is that such a high spiritual station?
Think of it as the highest level of visionary imagination. It's a non-physical reality where spiritual truths and symbols take on actual form, where you can directly witness the hidden reality of things. And experiencing that, making that transition, was the turning point that allowed him to formulate his entire doctrine of the unity of being. The insights he gained in Tunis literally changed global Islamic philosophy.
That's staggering. And to honor that, he dedicated his magnum opus, the huge 37-volume Meccan Revelations, to his teacher, al-Madawi.
And al-Madawi was a giant in his own right, not just a footnote. He was a student of the legendary Abu Madian, and some even considered him to be the Qutb of his age.
Qutb, okay, another key term. For anyone listening, what does that mean? to be the kutub, the spiritual pole.
The kutub is seen as the single spiritual axis around which the entire universe revolves at any given moment. It's the highest spiritual authority on Earth.
So the suggestion is that the most powerful spiritual figure in the 13th century world was just quietly teaching outside Tunis.
That's the implication. And even though his grave in La Marsa is pretty humble, that's the kind of spiritual titan we're talking about.
That is just amazing. So the foundations of all this world-changing thought were being laid right there on the Mediterranean coast. And speaking of the coast, let's go just a few kilometers up the hill to Sidi Bou Said.
Ah, the famous blue and white town.
Everyone goes there for the views, the mint tea, but you're literally walking through a living shrine.
You really are. The town is named for the 13th century Sufi master, Abu Said al-Baji, and he was another contemporary of al-Madawi.
So you have all these spiritual masters operating in the same tiny area at the same time. It's like a mystical Silicon Valley.
It kind of is, and al-Baji was known for his intense spiritual discipline. The sources say he'd spend long periods in meditation on the hill there, Jebel al-Manar, the Mountain of Fire, and then he'd walk down to the Zaytuna Mosque to teach.
And his Zawiya is the centerpiece of the whole town. You just can't separate the postcard photo from its mystical heart.
And it is a living heart. The sources tell us that Sufis from the Shadhili order still gather there every week for the Hadra.
Okay, so the Hadra. This is more than a meeting. This is the communal gathering for Dhikr, the remembrance of God. How does that practice work?
It's a very focused, immersive experience. It's the communal chanting of God's names or other sacred phrases over and over, often for hours. The rhythm, the sound, it's all designed to break down the barrier between the individual self and the divine.
It's a kind of active, intense meditation.
Exactly. And as it builds, it pushes the participants towards an ecstatic state.
And there's this great little detail about this. The famous high cafe there, with all the tourists, used to be the main entrance for men going to the Zawiya.
It's an incredible piece of living history. After these long, intense Hydra sessions, the men would come out and gather at that cafe. But they wouldn't just stop. They'd often keep reciting their prayers, continuing that spiritual state over coffee.
It totally reframes what that place is. It's not just a cafe with a nice view. It's been a spiritual decompression chamber for centuries.
It's a perfect example of how this inner life is mapped right onto the city's public spaces.
Now, you mentioned the Shatili order. Let's go back to central Tunis and talk about its founder, Abul Hassan al-Shatili.
Al-Shatili is another one of these hugely consequential figures. He started his teaching career right there in Tunisia. The order's name, the Shatiliya, even comes from a little village outside Tunis called Shadila.
And this isn't just a local group. The Shatili is one of the biggest Sufi orders, or tariqa, in the entire world. His influence, like Ibn Arabi's, was transformative.
It was. And the main center for this global order in Tunisia is the Zawiya Belhassan. But what's so powerful about this particular Zawiya is that it's not on his grave. He's buried in Egypt.
Oh, interesting. So why is it there?
It was built directly over the small, cramped cave where he used to retreat for his deepest meditations.
The actual cave.
The actual cave. Disciples or murids can still go down into it today. You can imagine how powerful that is, to be in the physical spot where the founder had his key spiritual breakthroughs.
Unbelievable.
And the weekly Hadra there, it's very sophisticated. As we said, it's all aimed at reaching that ecstatic state. The ultimate goal is something called fana.
Fana. The complete annihilation of the self and God.
Exactly. It's a complex idea, but it's the engine of the whole practice. It's not about losing consciousness. It's about dissolving the ego to realize that only God's reality is truly real.
That intensity requires incredible discipline.
Total focus. And that sound, that longing for dissolution and love, is what fills that Zawiya every week.
But al-Shahili's legacy in Tunis also produced another figure, one who is maybe even more important to the local community, especially for women.
Yes. Aisha al-Manubia, who everyone knows affectionately as Sayyida Manubia, she was one of his most brilliant students.
And when al-Shahili left for Egypt, she basically became the main spiritual authority in Tunis.
She did. And while female teachers weren't completely unheard of, her status was, for that time, absolutely unique. She broke all kinds of social and gender norms.
In a very public way. The sources say she was famous for debating male scholars, holding her own, and just asserting her intellectual and spiritual right to lead.
Which is why she's become this incredible feminist icon, centuries before the term even existed. She wasn't just tolerated, she was revered for her mind and her spiritual power.
But it wasn't just about intellect. She was known for her incredible compassion, right? She spent her time feeding the poor, helping those in need.
She completely embodied that core Sufi principle. The love you find in Dhikr has to extend out to all of creation because all creatures are manifestations of God. Her spirituality was intensely practical.
And her Zawiya in Manuba is still a major pilgrimage site, particularly for women.
A hugely important place, and it's become this powerful, safe space, not just for women, but for other marginalized groups that might feel pushed aside by more mainstream society.
And their practice is different.
It's incredibly vibrant. You have women gathering for Dhikr with intense chanting, yes, but also with rhythmic percussion, with drums, and sometimes even ritual dance. It's a very active, communal, embodied form of worship. It's beautiful.
So when you pull back and look at it all, you have al-Madawi teaching Ibn Arabi, al-Baji meditating over the sea, al-Sahili founding a global order from a cave, and Sayyida Manubia turning spiritual power into social justice.
All at the same time, in the same neighborhoods, it becomes so clear that Tunis isn't just a city with a Sufi history. It's a modern city built on a foundation of living spirituality that stretches back 800 years.
It just completely changes how you see those streets. You realize you're walking through a continuous, living spiritual current that is still flowing today.
The depth is just, it's incredible.
So what does this all mean for you listening to this? If a busy, modern, cosmopolitan city like Tunis is physically built around these active sites, all dedicated to achieving ecstatic spiritual annihilation in God, what does that persistent human longing tell us? What does it say about the foundational needs of human communities, no matter how modern or digitized we become? Something to think about.